It was a cold afternoon when I sat by my daughter's grave, hands numb, heart heavy. The air smelled of wet earth and old flowers. I had come to speak to her like I always did, to tell her small things, to feel close. The cemetery was empty, the sky low and gray. Then my phone buzzed. A single message lit the screen. "Come alone. Your husband can't be trusted." The words felt like a hand across my face. I looked up at the stone and thought of the Statue of Liberty shining, and I understood I was not safe. I was still on my knees when it happened. The cemetery around me was silent, the wind cold enough to sting my cheeks, and the morning sun barely touching the tops of the stones. I had just placed fresh white lilies on my daughter's grave, the same flowers she used to braid into her hair as a child. When my phone buzzed sharply in my coat pocket, the vibration startled me so badly that I almost dropped the small memorial candle I had been lighting. My heart was already weak from grief, but the jolt made it throb hard against my ribs. I pulled out the phone with shaking hands, expecting a message from a friend checking in, or maybe the funeral home confirming paperwork. But instead, a single line glared up from the bright screen. "Come alone, your husband can't be trusted." For a moment, my mind couldn't process the words. I just stared, frozen, as if time itself had paused. The air felt heavy, thick, as if the message had weight. I remember feeling the cold seep through my coat, but the shock burning up my spine was far stronger. My daughter was gone. I was kneeling at her grave, and yet someone who clearly knew the darkest corners of my family, had chosen this exact moment to warn me. My throat tightened, my hands weakened. I clutched the phone so hard that my knuckles turned white, afraid that if I let go, the truth would vanish and I'd wake from this nightmare to an even worse one. I looked around slowly, half expecting someone to be watching me. The cemetery had thinned out. Most of the mourners had drifted away. Only a few distant figures walked among the stones, their heads bowed. Nothing looked out of place. No suspicious person, no movement behind trees, just quiet, cold grief. Yet my skin prickled, like someone's eyes were crawling along my back. I turned toward the gravel path and saw my husband standing there, hands folded, looking down at another grave as if deep in thought. To anyone else, he would have seemed the picture of sorrow, the grieving father who had lost his only daughter. But to me, in that moment, everything about him felt wrong. The warning echoed in my mind, louder than the wind. "Your husband can't be trusted." The words were impossible to ignore. They clawed at my chest with every breath. A question rose inside me, one I never imagined I would ever think in my entire married life. Had my daughter known something before she died? My fingers trembled as I read the message again, each word feeling colder, sharper, more urgent. Whoever sent it didn't bother with details, didn't include a name, didn't try to explain. They simply told me to come alone and that my husband was not to be trusted. A warning with no explanation is always more terrifying than one with reasons, because it means the danger is bigger than you can understand. I crouched there, still half kneeling, half sitting in the dirt, trying to calm my racing heart. But the harder I tried, the more memories flooded my mind. Arguments behind closed doors, my daughter's tense smiles, her sudden silences on the phone, the way she started avoiding family dinners in the last months of her life. At the time, I had blamed it on stress on work, on adulthood, on anything except harm, because no mother wants to believe danger is living inside her own home. The message forced me to reconsider every assumption, every memory. My grief mixed with fear until I couldn't tell one from the other. I felt as if the ground beneath the grave shifted slightly, leaving me unbalanced. My breath came quick, short, uneven. I pressed a hand to the tombstone as if it could anchor me. For a moment, an insane thought slipped through my mind. Was my daughter trying to reach me? But no, this wasn't a ghost. This was a person, a living person, who knew something they shouldn't, something dangerous, something connected to my daughter's death, and something my husband didn't want me to know. I stood slowly, wiping the dirt from my knees. My body felt weak, like someone had drained the strength out through my fingertips. My phone buzzed again, another vibration that made my heart leap painfully. But when I checked, there was no new message, just the echo of the old one burning into my screen and into my mind. I turned toward my husband again. He was still standing there, but now he was watching me, his expression unreadable, his face calm, but his eyes looked alert, as if he sensed something had shifted, as if he could feel me slipping away from trusting him. In that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The funeral was not the end of my daughter's story. It was the beginning of something darker, and whoever messaged me wanted me to face it alone. And so, still trembling, still grieving, still terrified, I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and walked away from the grave, knowing my world had just cracked open. When I looked up from the gravestone, my eyes found my husband standing a few steps away, pretending to speak with a group of relatives. But he wasn't really talking. He was watching me, watching my phone, watching my reaction. The moment our eyes met, he walked toward me slowly, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile people use when they're trying to hide fear under politeness. He asked if I was ready to leave, his voice steady, almost gentle, but something about it felt rehearsed, as if he had practiced it in the mirror before coming to the cemetery. I forced myself to nod even though my stomach tightened like a knot. I didn't tell him about the message. Not yet. His smile widened just a little, like he was relieved I said nothing. It was small, barely noticeable, but I caught it. A smile at a funeral when your own wife is grieving. A smile that flickered the moment he checked my hands to see if I was holding the phone. That wasn't grief. That was calculation. And calculation always hides something. As we walked toward the car, he kept brushing invisible dirt off his sleeves, a habit he only had when he was nervous. When we reached the parking lot, he placed his hand on the small of my back, something he hadn't done in years, and said, "Let's go home. This day has been hard enough." His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he wanted to guide me away before I could think too much, before I could speak to the wrong person, before I could ask the wrong question. But I didn't move. I stood there, staring at him, trying to read every line in his face. The man I had been married to for 40 years suddenly felt like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. There was something off, something cold behind his eyes, something that didn't match the grief of a father who had buried his child that morning. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He flinched slightly, then quickly forced his face back into that polite, shallow smile. That small reaction alone told me more than any text message could. He didn't want me to see who was calling. He didn't want me to hear what was being said. He didn't want me near the truth. So I asked him casually, "Who was that?" He shrugged too quickly. "Just work." But he hadn't worked weekends in years, and certainly not on the day of our daughter's funeral. He kept glancing at me as if trying to judge whether I believed him. I didn't say a word. I just watched the lie settle on his face. It didn't even bother him. When we finally got in the car, he gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale, and gave me another small smile, this one even colder. A smile that said, "Don't ask questions." A smile that said, "You're better off not knowing." A smile that tasted like warning. And suddenly I felt it, an urge to protect myself, something I had never felt with him before. The man beside me felt unfamiliar, far away, dangerous even. The message from the cemetery echoed in my mind. "Come alone. Your husband can't be trusted." I didn't know who had sent it, but sitting beside him in that car, watching him pretend everything was normal, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever sent the message wasn't lying. When my daughter was alive, our home had always been full of noise, light, and warmth. She had a way of making everything feel easier, even on the hardest days. She would sit beside me during dinner, talk about her work, tell me her plans, and laugh about little things her friends said. She was the kind of daughter who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every detail that most people forget. After she passed, the house did not just become quiet, it became hollow, like the walls had lost their purpose. My husband and I tried to support each other in the beginning, but slowly, something changed inside him. He withdrew into himself, shutting doors both literally and emotionally. He began spending long hours outside the house, coming home late without explanations. When I asked where he had been, he would simply say, "Out," in a tone so flat it made me stop asking some nights. He wouldn't even look at me as he ate, and I felt like I was sharing a table with a stranger. At first, I assumed it was grief. I tried to believe that he was coping in his own way, just as I was in mine. But as months passed, grief alone could no longer explain the coldness in his eyes or the distance in his voice. It felt like he was carrying something heavy, something he didn't want me to see. My daughter had noticed it too before she died. She once confided in me that she was worried about him, that he was acting secretive, making phone calls in the backyard, and hiding papers in his study. I brushed it off at the time, telling her he was probably just stressed. I regret that now. I should have listened. I should have paid attention when she said, "Mom, sometimes I think Dad is keeping something from us." But you never imagine that the man you've shared a life with, raised a family with, could be hiding something big enough to damage your child's peace. Over the years, financial matters began to change too. My husband became very controlling over accounts that used to be shared. He insisted on handling the bills alone, took documents out of the family safe, and locked his study whenever he left. I told myself these were the habits of a grieving man trying to feel in control. But deep inside, a small voice kept whispering, "This is not normal." Still, I pushed that voice down, believing that loyalty required patience. My daughter, on the other hand, had stopped talking to him in the months before her death. Their conversations were cold, rushed, sometimes tense. I often saw the worry in her eyes when he entered the room. I didn't ask too many questions because I feared hearing something that would break the fragile peace of our home. Looking back, silence is what allowed things to grow in the shadows. Silence is dangerous when secrets begin to form. A week before her accident, my daughter had come home looking exhausted. She sat beside me on the couch and said, "Mom, promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, check Dad's study." I laughed nervously, thinking she was being dramatic. "Nothing will happen to you," I had said confidently, a confidence I now hate myself for. She didn't argue, but she gave me a look that still haunts me, a look of fear mixed with urgency, like she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. After her passing, my husband refused to talk about her final days. Whenever I brought up her name, he would change the subject or leave the room. He didn't want to visit her grave often, only standing there briefly before walking back to the car. I thought maybe the pain was too much for him, but now I can't help but wonder if it was something else, something he couldn't face. The tension in our home grew gradually, not suddenly. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it moves quietly between rooms, unnoticed, until the day it finally reveals itself. His phone began ringing at odd hours. He would step outside to answer, speaking in hushed tones. When he returned, he always had the same excuse: wrong number. Eventually, he stopped offering excuses at all. Through all of this, I kept telling myself that marriage required understanding, that grief made people act differently. But grief does not create secrets. Grief does not send hidden messages or make a man lock away documents from his own wife. As I knelt at my daughter's grave that day, receiving that terrifying text, everything suddenly connected. The coldness, the secrecy, the tension, the arguments. My daughter had known something, and now someone else knew it too. I stood there realizing that the past was not just painful, it was unfinished. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a push toward the truth, a truth I had ignored for far too long. After my daughter's funeral, the house became strangely quiet, but inside that silence, small signs began to scratch at my mind, soft at first, then sharper. I tried to tell myself it was grief making me read too much into things. But grief does not move objects. Grief does not lock drawers. Grief does not whisper behind closed doors. Something else was happening, something I had not allowed myself to see while we were drowning in sorrow. The first sign came the morning after we buried her. My husband left the house unusually early, saying he needed air. That wasn't strange on its own, but when he returned, he carried no groceries, no mail, nothing that explained the 2 hours he was gone. His face was tense, like someone who was holding back words. I asked where he went. He shrugged and said, "Just out." No explanation, no detail, just out. A sentence so empty that it felt full of lies. The second sign came when I found his keys on the kitchen counter. Not the main set he always carried, but an old set I hadn't seen in years. A car key, a small silver key, and one thick brass key I didn't recognize. I asked him about them. He took them quickly and said they were spares, though I knew every spare in the house I had organized them myself. He kept the keys with him the rest of the day, slipping them into his pocket like something precious or dangerous. I tried not to overthink it, but my daughter used to say, "Mom, keys are stories. People don't hide keys unless they're hiding doors too." That sentence echoed in me for hours. The third sign came in the evening. I walked past his office room and heard him on the phone, speaking in a hushed voice, almost a whisper. I froze just outside the door. He said words like account, deadline, and she can't know yet. When he realized I was near, he hung up fast and opened the door with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He asked if I needed something. I said no, and he closed the door again, not gently this time, but firmly, like someone sealing a secret behind wood. Over the next few days, the tension thickened. I noticed a drawer in his desk was locked, something he had never done in our entire marriage. I found papers missing from the file cabinet, documents relating to my daughter's life insurance and her small savings account. My husband claimed he was organizing things, but his hands shook when he said it. I watched the way he avoided eye contact, the way he changed the subject whenever I mentioned our daughter. It was as if he was trying to bury more than grief. Then came the fourth sign. Small, but it cut the deepest. I went to place fresh flowers on the table, and under the vase I found a half-burned piece of paper in the fireplace ashes. Only a few words were readable: beneficiary, change, and signature. My breath caught in my throat. I knew my daughter's signature well, and I knew she had never changed any documents. She always told me, "Mom, if anything happens to me, everything goes to you." But the burned paper suggested someone had tried to change that recently. Every small detail began fitting into a shape I feared. My husband wasn't grieving. He was hiding. And the message at the cemetery, "Your husband can't be trusted," kept crawling back into my thoughts like a warning I could no longer ignore. The last straw fell one night when I walked into our bedroom and found him standing by my dresser, rummaging through my drawers, quickly pulling his hand away when he saw me. I asked what he was looking for. He claimed he was searching for a handkerchief, but his eyes darted toward the drawer where I kept important papers. I knew then that it wasn't grief making him act strange. It was guilt. Little by little, the cracks turned into a clear picture. My husband had secrets. My daughter knew something before she died, and someone, whoever sent that message, was trying to help me see the truth. And for the first time since losing her, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off and the message still glowing on my phone screen. The words felt heavier the longer I stared at them. "Come alone. Your husband can't be trusted." I read it again and again until my eyes began to water. I couldn't tell if it was grief or fear anymore. The silence in the house felt thick, like it was hiding something from me. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed slower, almost cautious, as if reacting to the tension sitting in my chest. I tried to breathe normally, but my mind kept circling back to that warning. Someone out there knew something. Someone knew what I didn't. And that thought pressed on my heart like a stone. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes from earlier in the day. My husband standing a few feet away at the cemetery, hands clasped behind his back, staring not at our daughter's grave, but at me. His expression wasn't grief. It was calculation. I remembered how he didn't shed a single tear all day. Not even once. Not even when they lowered our daughter into the ground. Instead, he kept checking his watch. At the time, I told myself people grieve in different ways, but now, that explanation felt weak, almost forced. I couldn't ignore the creeping suspicion that something deeper, darker was involved. A sudden thud upstairs made me jump. It was probably just the house settling, but in that moment, it felt like a warning. I got up quietly, trying not to make a sound, and walked towards the stairs. Every step felt like I was moving underwater, heavy, slow, unsteady. I paused halfway up, listening hard. All I could hear was the soft hum of the heater and my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Still, something didn't feel right. When I reached our bedroom, I found my husband asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing sounded too even, too controlled, as if he were aware of my presence and wanted to keep me from hearing anything unusual. I stood there for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light. I knew this man for 43 years, shared a home, shared a life, shared a child we loved more than anything, but now his face didn't feel familiar. It felt strange, closed, guarded, like the face of someone I had never really known. I backed out silently and returned downstairs. I sat again, staring at the message, trying to think clearly. Whoever sent it had also sent a location. A pin dropped onto the map on my screen, an isolated place, about an hour away. My stomach twisted. Why would someone send me there? Why alone? Why without trusting my own husband? I typed back, "Who is this?" But before I could hit send, the message box blinked. Message failed to deliver. No signal. As if the sender had already disappeared, as if the warning was the only thing I was meant to receive. Fear settled deeper into my bones. I went into my daughter's room, needing some comfort, some memory to hold on to. Her scent was gone now, but the room still carried her warmth. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked around, searching for something that would guide me. That's when I saw it. Her journal on the nightstand. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The last few pages were covered in hurried handwriting, not full sentences, not clear explanations, just fragments, words like dad, angry, money, lied, meeting, scared. My throat tightened. I turned another page and froze, written in shaking ink. I think Dad is hiding something from Mom. If anything happens, she must know. The room suddenly felt colder. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and painful. The message at the grave, the look in my husband's eyes, the journal, the locked drawers. Everything I dismissed for months came crashing back like a wave. I whispered into the quiet room, "Claire, what were you trying to tell me?" But of course, no answer came. Only that empty ache inside my chest, the one that grew sharper with every clue I uncovered. I closed the journal slowly and pressed it to my chest, tears finally slipping free. My grief was no longer just sadness. It was fear and anger, a mother's instinct awakening after being asleep too long. Something terrible had been happening behind my back, something my daughter noticed before anyone else, something someone else was now warning me about. And at that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever truth was hiding out there, whatever danger was lurking behind the message, I could not ignore it anymore. When I reached the old family cabin that evening, the sun was already sinking behind the trees, turning the sky into a dull orange that felt too quiet for what I was about to face. I hadn't been there in years. The path was still familiar under my feet, the same stones, the same smell of pine, the same creak in the front step that my daughter used to laugh about when she was small. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart beating harder with each inch. The place felt untouched, but there was a strange energy in the air, as if someone had been there recently. Dust lay thick on the shelves, but one corner of the room was clean, too clean. I walked toward the old wooden table we used for board games when my daughter was little. Something caught my eye, a drawer slightly open. For years it had always been shut tight. I pulled it open fully and froze. Inside were my daughter's journals, all of them. Her handwriting hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't seen these since before she died. I thought they were lost, or maybe she had taken them with her when she moved out. But here they were, stacked carefully, not abandoned, not forgotten. My hands shook so badly that I had to sit before I opened the first book. The pages were worn, the ink faded in places. At first, it was normal. She wrote about work, friends, worries about bills, plans for the future. Then the tone changed. Suddenly the words became tense, uneven, rushed. She wrote about someone watching her, someone taking her mail, someone she feared was reading her messages. She mentioned my husband more and more, not with anger, but with careful caution. She wrote things like, "Dad is hiding something," and "I think he knows I found the papers." The papers? I didn't understand at first. I kept reading. In a later entry, she described overhearing him on the phone late at night, speaking in low, angry tones. She mentioned him discussing money transfers, debts, and something about protecting his name, words that made my stomach twist. She wrote that she confronted him gently once, and he brushed her off with a smile, the same cold, patient smile he had given me so many times. She said that after that, he became more secretive. He locked drawers he never locked before. He left the house at odd hours. He took calls outside. She wrote, "I think he's planning something. I don't think I can trust him anymore." My heart felt like it was being split into two. Every line I read made the cabin feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. She wrote that she found documents, papers with my husband's signature on them, ones tied to our home, our savings, and even her insurance. She didn't understand all of it, but she knew it was wrong. She wrote that she was scared to show me because she didn't want to make things worse. Her last entry nearly broke me. "If anything happens to me, Mom has to know the truth." I pressed the journal to my chest and cried. Not the soft, quiet tears of a grieving mother, but the sharp, painful kind that shake your whole body. It felt like I was losing her all over again. For the first time, it hit me that her death might not have been an accident. That thought alone made the room tilt. As I wiped my face, I noticed something under the bed, a box pushed far into the corner. I pulled it out, breath shaking, and opened it. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, legal forms, and emails printed from her account. She had been gathering evidence. She had been preparing to confront someone, maybe even expose something. My husband's name was all over the documents, transfers he never told me about, hidden accounts, payments that made no sense. My daughter had discovered the truth, and someone made sure she never got a chance to speak it. A cold dread washed over me. The message at her grave, the warning. The person who texted me wasn't threatening me. They were trying to save me. My daughter had died while trying to protect our family from something dark my husband was hiding, and now whoever sent that message believed I was next. I gathered the journals, the documents, every piece of evidence she left behind. My legs felt weak as I stood. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was waking up. I had spent years trusting a man who had been hiding things from both of us. And now the truth lay in my hands because my daughter had tried to warn me from beyond her own life. Walking out of the cabin, I felt different. Broken, yes, but awake. For the first time since her death, I knew what I had to do. My daughter had left me a path, and now it was my turn to follow it, no matter where it led. After reading those pages in the cabin, my entire body felt weak, like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed everything tight. I sat on the edge of the old wooden chair, trying to steady my hands. The dust in the room floated in the air, the same room where we once spent summers as a family. Now it felt colder, unfamiliar, like the memories inside it had shifted into something darker. I knew I could not face this alone. My daughter had written these warnings for a reason. She wanted someone to find them, someone she trusted. That someone was me. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found one name that still made me feel steady: Margaret. She had been my friend for more than 30 years, and she had been our family lawyer almost as long. If there was anyone I could trust right now, it was her. I stepped outside the cabin to get better reception, the cool wind brushing against my face. My hands were still shaking as I called her. When she answered, her voice was calm, steady, exactly what I needed. I explained everything: the text message, the diaries, the strange behavior, the warning about my husband. She listened closely to every word without interrupting, and the silence on the other end told me she understood the seriousness. After a moment, she said she was driving over right away. I felt relief mixed with dread. Relief that someone capable was taking this seriously. Dread because her urgency confirmed that the danger was real. While I waited for her, I went back inside and gathered all the diaries into a neat stack. I wanted every piece of evidence preserved exactly as my daughter had left it. Some pages were torn, some written in shaky handwriting, and some stained with water, as if she had cried while writing them. I sat quietly, reading more carefully this time. She had written about feeling watched inside her own home, about money missing from accounts she thought were secure, about conversations she overheard but didn't understand. She had suspected my husband was involved in things she could never fully explain. She had written that she wanted to talk to me, but never got the courage. Reading her words made me feel a pain I cannot describe, a pain deeper than grief, a pain that told me I had failed to protect her when she was still alive. When Margaret arrived, her headlights cut through the darkness, making the cabin feel less lonely. She stepped out of the car holding a briefcase, her expression serious. She hugged me tightly before walking inside. When she saw the journals, she went silent for several minutes as she read through page after page. I watched her face. The more she read, the more her expression changed, from confusion to concern, then from concern to a quiet, sharp anger. She finally closed the diary and took a deep breath. She told me my daughter had been in danger weeks before she died. She told me the writings were not paranoia, they were warnings. She told me we needed to move carefully because accusations without proof could backfire, especially if my husband had been covering his tracks for years. She opened her briefcase and pulled out legal files, a small recorder, and forms she said I needed to sign to protect myself and my daughter's estate. I listened as she explained everything step by step. She spoke calmly, making sure I understood that this was no longer just a family matter. It was now a legal case, something that could expose things buried for years. She said my daughter's death may not have been as simple as we believed. She said there might be more people involved. She said the text message was likely sent by someone who knew part of the truth, but was too afraid to speak openly. Each word made my heart beat faster, but I stayed focused. I could not let fear freeze me now. Margaret helped me gather all the documents, took photographs, sealed the original diaries in protective covers, and placed them carefully into her case. She said she would file an emergency notice with the authorities to freeze any suspicious accounts tied to my daughter's name. She also said she would request surveillance of my husband's financial activities. I felt both terrified and grateful. Terrified because everything she mentioned confirmed that my daughter had been right. Grateful because I finally had someone strong beside me to help carry the weight. Before leaving the cabin, Margaret told me I was not alone. She said this was the beginning of uncovering the truth. She reminded me to stay calm around my husband, not to reveal anything, not to confront him emotionally, not to change my routine. She said the safest path now was silence and caution. I nodded, holding the diaries close to my chest like they were the last pieces of my daughter I still had. As we stepped outside, the night air was sharp. I locked the cabin door behind us, feeling as if I was closing the door on my old life too, the one where I believed everything in my home was safe and honest. We drove back separately, but I kept watching her car's headlights in my mirror. It felt like she was guiding me home, guiding me toward the truth, guiding me toward the strength I needed. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a direction, a purpose, something more than grief. My daughter had reached out in the only way she could, through a stranger's warning, through diaries she hid, through a message sent from beyond her own voice. And now it was my turn to protect her legacy, just like she had tried to protect me. When I came home from the cabin, the weight of everything I had read in my daughter's diaries sat heavy on my chest. I walked through the hallway slowly, touching the walls she once brushed against when she was little. My husband was in the living room, sitting in his usual chair, pretending to read the newspaper, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the stiffness in his jaw. He sensed something had changed, even before I said a word. I placed my bag down, keeping my breath steady, reminding myself that fear would only make him stronger. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not because the situation was safe, but because the truth was now with me, written in my daughter's own handwriting. I stood in front of him, watching the paper tremble slightly in his hands. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him with wild claims. I simply laid the diaries, the photographs, and the printed copy of the strange warning text on the table in front of us. His face went blank, like someone had pulled the life out of his eyes. He tried to keep reading the paper, but his hand froze halfway. That small reaction was enough to confirm everything I feared. A man doesn't freeze like that unless he has something to hide. I sat down across from him, keeping my voice steady as I told him I had gone to the cabin. I explained how I found our daughter's notes, every anxious line, every fear she wrote down before she died. I described the warnings she left for me, the things she suspected, the behavior she documented. I kept my explanations simple and factual, not emotional. I knew if I let grief speak, he would twist it into confusion. When I mentioned the financial records and the suspicious withdrawals she had tracked, he blinked rapidly, his throat tightening. I could tell he was searching for explanations, lies, excuses, anything that would soften the truth pressing against him. He tried to deny it at first, shaking his head slowly, claiming I had misunderstood, that grief was making me imagine things. But I placed the receipts on the table. Amounts withdrawn without explanation, accounts opened in her name after she passed, and payments made to individuals I had never heard of. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He stared at the papers for a long time, as if hoping they would disappear. I leaned forward and told him I didn't want stories. I didn't need drama. I needed the truth, the real truth, not the one he had told others, not the one he hid behind, not the one he had rehearsed for so long. His eyes darted to the door, as if calculating whether to walk out or face what was in front of him. I could almost see the panic forming, the fear of losing control, the dread of being exposed. I reminded him that I had already shared everything with Margaret, the lawyer. His breathing hitched. I watched him grip the arm of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I told him the authorities were aware something was wrong, that questions would be asked, that his silence could no longer protect him. This wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. A man can hide secrets, but he cannot hide evidence forever, not when someone finally decides to stop looking away. I made it clear that the time for deception was over. He needed to choose, cooperate, and allow the truth to come out properly, or face everything alone with no support from me or anyone else. He was no longer dealing with a grieving wife. He was dealing with a mother who had found her daughter's final warnings and refused to ignore them. I told him that loyalty ends the moment betrayal begins. He sat back in the chair, his body slowly collapsing in on itself. His face looked tired, older than I remembered. For a moment, he seemed like a stranger, not the man I married, but someone who had been living behind his shadow for years. I watched him try to breathe normally, but the truth had already cracked whatever strength he pretended to have. He didn't confess everything, not yet, but he didn't deny it either. His silence was an admission in itself. I could feel the room shifting, the lies falling apart, the truth rising slowly, like a storm ready to break. I stood up and told him the final thing he needed to hear. I would protect our daughter's memory at any cost, and if he had played any part in destroying her life, he would answer for it. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. His eyes lowered, and for the first time in years, he looked small. I walked away knowing the confrontation was over, and the consequences were about to begin. When the authorities finally stepped in, the atmosphere around my home changed in a way that felt both terrifying and strangely relieving. For years, I had lived with small doubts, quiet suspicions, and uneasy glances, all of which I tried to push aside. But now everything was out in the open. The officers moved with calm professionalism, asking questions, collecting the evidence Margaret and I had carefully gathered, and reviewing the diaries my daughter wrote. Each page was painful to hand over, but necessary. Every sentence held some piece of the truth she had been too afraid to speak aloud when she was alive. Watching the officers photograph those pages, seal them into envelopes, and file them as official documents felt like giving her a voice again. A voice that could no longer be silenced. My husband stood stiffly in the living room while the officers questioned him, his face drained of color, his mouth pulled tight as though he could control the situation by sheer will. I watched him carefully, noting every twitch of his hand, every shift in his gaze. It was strange. After spending decades with a man, you think you know everything about him, but as he answered each question, I realized how much of him I had never really understood. The calm charm that once drew me in now looked hollow. The confidence that used to reassure me now felt like arrogance. Every word he spoke sounded rehearsed, as though he had been living a script for years. The officers asked whether he had accessed our daughter's financial records, whether he had been in contact with certain people, whether he had ever been near the places mentioned in the diaries. He denied most of it, admitted a few details reluctantly, and tried to downplay everything else. But evidence carries a weight that excuses cannot balance. Margaret stood beside me through it all, her steady presence reminding me that I was not alone. Even in the most painful moment of my life, she mouthed the words, "You're doing the right thing," whenever my hands started shaking. When the officers finally finished, they asked if he would come with them for additional questioning. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with a blend of betrayal, disbelief, and a quiet plea for mercy. But I didn't look away. For years I had ignored signs, softened my own instincts, and convinced myself that loyalty meant silence. But standing there, I realized something simple. Loyalty should never mean blindness, and love should never demand that you turn away from the truth. He left with them without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft but final thud, a sound that echoed through the house like the end of a long, painful chapter. I stood in the hallway, feeling the weight of the moment sink slowly into my bones. This was not victory, not in the way people imagine revenge to be. This was justice, carved out of heartbreak. This was protection, born from the ashes of loss. In the days that followed, things changed quickly. Accounts that he had controlled for years were frozen. Property documents were reviewed. Financial inconsistencies from months, even years, were uncovered. Every discovery added another layer to the truth I had once been too afraid to face. Margaret ensured that I regained full control over the estate and finances, making sure nothing slipped through unnoticed again. She explained each step patiently, reminding me that this process was not only about consequences for him, but also about rebuilding a life he had slowly taken from me without my realizing it. My home felt different without him, strangely peaceful, yet heavy with memories I didn't know how to handle. I walked through the rooms quietly, sometimes stopping by the photographs on the walls, studying the faces we used to be. I thought about my daughter constantly, her handwriting, her smile, her bravery in writing those diaries. Even when she must have been terrified, I realized that maybe she had trusted me to find the truth someday. Maybe she had hoped I would choose myself, choose justice, choose honesty, even if the cost was high. When the final reports came in confirming the extent of his actions, I didn't cry. I simply sat down, hands folded in my lap, and breathed for what felt like the first time in years. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after walking through darkness for too long. The kind that comes when you finally choose to turn on the light. In the weeks that followed, my life changed in ways I never imagined, yet every change felt like a slow breath of fresh air. After years of holding everything inside, I woke up each morning in a quiet house that finally felt safe again. There were no more late-night whispers behind closed doors, no suspicious phone calls, no tension crawling across the dinner table. The stillness felt strange at first, almost too peaceful, as if the walls were waiting for the next secret to erupt. But as each day passed, the silence became comforting, like the house was exhaling after carrying too much truth for too long. My daughter's diaries stayed on my bedside table. Sometimes I opened them, reading her words again and again, her warnings, her fear, her strength even when she felt alone. I traced her handwriting with my fingers, feeling each letter like a heartbeat. It hurt, but it healed me too. I realized she had been trying to protect me long before that text ever reached my phone. Even in her final days, she had been watching, listening, trying to shield me from something dark inside our own home. The thought stayed with me like a second shadow. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. The investigation into my husband's actions widened, revealing financial decisions made behind my back, hidden accounts, and manipulative behavior he had woven over the years like a careful web. The truth spread through the family, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one imagining things. People listened, they believed, and slowly, the weight that had been pressing on my chest since the funeral lifted piece by piece. My husband tried calling me a few times, but I never picked up. There was nothing left to hear. A man who hides danger behind a calm smile does not deserve explanations or second chances. I learned that survival sometimes means leaving the puzzle pieces on the floor instead of trying to put them back together. Some people break trust so deeply that rebuilding becomes nothing but self-punishment. There were days when grief hit me hard, when the house felt too big, too empty, too filled with reminders of a family that once was. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and imagine my daughter walking through the door, her arms open, her laughter echoing through the halls. Those moments hurt the most, but they also reminded me why I fought so hard, why I followed the clues, why I didn't let fear silence me. I owed her truth. I owed her justice. And I owed myself freedom. I started visiting her grave more often, not in despair, but in conversation. I talked to her about everything: the investigation, the quiet meals I now cooked for myself, the way the roses she planted in the backyard were blooming again. I told her I wasn't afraid anymore. I told her I understood now how strong she had been, how much she had tried to protect me silently. And every time I walked away, I felt lighter, as if she was walking beside me, guiding me back to myself. Friends checked in more. I began opening my doors again, letting people sit in my living room, letting laughter return in small, gentle pieces. For years, I had been living in a home built with fear and pretense, and I hadn't realized how draining it had become. Now, even a simple conversation over coffee felt like a gift. Healing is not loud. It grows quietly, like dawn, slowly pushing away the dark. I also learned to trust my instincts again. The warning that came at the grave, "Your husband can't be trusted," had been terrifying, but it had saved me. It reminded me that intuition is not weakness. It is wisdom earned through years of understanding the people we love. Even when that truth is painful, I promised myself I would never ignore those instincts again, not for comfort, not for peace, not for anyone. As time passed, I realized something important. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes shape. It lives with you, sometimes as sorrow, sometimes as strength. My daughter's memory became my guide. Every time I made a decision, every time I chose courage over fear, I felt her pride like a warm hand on my shoulder. She may have left this world, but her voice never dimmed. It echoed in every choice I made to protect myself. Now, when I look at her photo on the mantle, I don't crumble. I smile softly and whisper, "I followed your message. I listened. I survived." Because survival is its own kind of justice, and the woman I am now, stronger, aware, unafraid, is the mother she always believed I could be. In the quiet of my rebuilt life, I've learned the final truth. Sometimes danger doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the people closest to us. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away before their shadows swallow us whole. And so I honor my daughter by staying strong, staying aware, and never letting silence cover the truth again.